Moving into one of the other topics from the report relating to that circular solutions can also lead to financial benefits, that you're not only doing this because it's a nice thing, you're actually doing it also because it makes sense from a financial perspective. Birgitte, do you want to share a little bit about your experience in your circular procurement and how that benefited your organization?
Yes, I can. In City of Aalborg, there are 7 ICT departments, and they are completely separated. And when I started working with the 7 department, the 3 of them was reselling the used equipment, or only laptops and some smartphones, and the other they didn't. They treat it as waste and just throw it away. So by start talking about that used equipment was valuable and you can get money for it, it was just beneficial to just start to resell it instead of throw it away. And then in the process we realized that we also have an engraved logo on every laptop. It costs money to make, and when we are going to resell them and like them to be used another user, you had to get rid of this engraved logo, and it was not easy. So the value of our used laptop was not very high. So we started a process of changing this policy of having engraved logos, and now we had changed it, and we had to replace it with stickers and DNA labeling. So the value of our used equipment is much higher now.
Thank you. Sebastian, you work exactly with this, looking after the refurbished. Do you want to react to it? I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, of course, it's great taking away the engravement. It helps a lot, keeping the value high. But I also like to connect back to something you said before, Birgitte, about treating it with care and treating the product as a resource and not a waste, because that's something that we often see. And as soon as you start treating something as waste, it will never be able to be reused. So we need to think about this as a resource. And there's one reason in which we have been doing this for 25 years, and there's a lot of companies doing this around the world, and why it's such a great circular case. And that's because it's a lot of embedded value into electronics, and once it's used, it has a high value in it. So it makes a lot of economical sense for both us as a refurbishment to do that, but also the customers and those selling the IT equipment, because companies actually get surprised when we say that we buy their used IT. It's actually a resource for us. We pay them rather good for the used IT. And our biggest challenge is actually not selling refurbished products. It's getting hold of the refurbished products. So getting the used IT equipment is our biggest challenge. And that's interesting. If you look between the linear and the circular economy, in the linear economy, the supply chain is easier. Our supply chain is thousands of organizations and their used IT. So it's the value which makes it circular and why it makes sense to use it again.
Thank you. Birgitte, you had your hand up.
Yes, and it's starting to treat your equipment like a resource instead of waste. And in this process, we also realized that a lot of the equipment was just missing, or whenever it's not a City of Aalborg equipment anymore, we didn't know where it is, or we don't know where it is now. So maybe it's just in a drawer somewhere, or in a child's playing equipment or something. So we don't know where everything is.
Thank you.
So getting on track what we have.
Josephine, I'm curious as well what your financial experience is with implementing more circular thinking to your IT procurement. Have you seen any direct benefits? You talk about them in the report interview, so I don't know if you want to share a little bit about it.
Yes, of course, refurbishing and reusing is, of course, also financially beneficial. I think connected to what Siddharth said before, laptops are is a mature product category in a mature market. Our challenges right now is within the smartphone market. The smartphone product category is not as mature when it comes to circular aspects. I'm very interested in hearing what the rest of the panel has to say regarding smartphones. There's no, for example, there's no TCO certification, hopefully soon. What we do in the city of Malmö, we demand for every smartphone that is purchased with screen protection, with skal, anyway, with protection, so that case sorry, so that it's more durable. But yeah, that's the challenge we're dealing with. Otherwise, of course, it's more financially beneficial to use the products longer and to circulate them once they're used. Also, there's as a public sector organization, there's the aspect of information security, which the municipality handles a lot of sensitive information that connected to the citizens of the city of Malmö. So we need to really handle that with care, meaning that, or in our case, it means that it's not possible for one department to circulate laptops, for example, to another department within the city. But instead, we have to send them in the Go IT loop that Steve mentioned before, and to have the information removed in a safe way. So that's a challenge that we're discussing internally.
Siddharth, do you want to reflect on, have you seen in your research any difference in maturity from the smartphone market as opposed to, I would say, perhaps the notebook market and the set computer market, or screens, are there any trends on compared to what type of product we're looking at?
Yeah, I think I can only confirm what Josephine was saying, because smartphones, even though technically the technical lifetime of smartphones is actually much longer than the use time. So with smartphones, we have a problem that the so-called psychological obsolescence. That means that products are replaced without being defect. So this is a major issue, and I think there it's important that I think the public authorities, they normally have their tables for typical lifetimes of products which they want to use. And for smartphones, I would rather say that they should be used for the equal number of years as a notebook. So there is no technical reason for using the smartphones less than notebooks at this point of time. So if you're using the notebooks for 5 years or 6 years, you can still use your smartphones for 5 to 6 years. One point which is maybe important to understand is the aspect of data protection and data security, because lots of people use smartphones in parallel to official use also for their private reasons. For example, taking photographs and during the official trips and all these kind of things. So they are quite scared of losing that data, or that data will go in the hand of some not so good people. So there, I think it's important to have a very clear requirement for data sanitization also for smartphones. And I think, if I'm not wrong, TCO has developed a kind of a criteria for that, for data sanitization. And otherwise, what you can do is to look into the data protection guidelines of your Ministry of Internal Affairs or some other ministry who normally publishes the list of reliable softwares and programs which can be used for data sanitization. Not all of them available in the market commercially are good enough, So they would say that they would overwrite the data a couple of times, but the data can still be traceable if you are a good professional. So if you can rely on the list from your ministries, for example, for internal affairs, who publish those kind of lists, or look what eco labels have been developing in terms of criteria for data sanitization. Yeah.
Yes, data is a big obstacle for a lot of organizations in turning e-waste into products that are going to be used for a longer period of time. We've seen that, and I don't know, Sebastian, you had your hand up. I know you're also working with this a lot. Do you want to reflect on it?
Yeah, of course. If you look at data, that's our number one priority. That we need to make sure that the ones who leave their computers to us, or we buy them from them, that they feel secure about how their data are handled. And there's a lot of thinking about how that is working in the reuse. But I would say when it's reused, it's probably a higher security of data if you leave it to larger companies. For example, for every computer we get in, you will get a specification that the data has been removed for that specific computer. So I think data is super important, and you have to work really hard with that and make sure that the customers feel safe with that. And I'd also like to just quickly talk about smartphones, because we have seen at us that, for example, computers are rather easy to fix up. It's not that big of a problem, and it's been the same. But if you look at smartphones, it's more difficult to fix them up, and it has become more and more difficult over the years as they become smaller, and so that's an issue. We really need to stop designing for the linear economy. I mean, I think Steve mentioned it brilliantly, semi-circular, and that's everything we can be as long as we think about the reuse in the end of life. We need to think about the reuse when we design the products in the beginning.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to say that, reflecting on what Josephine said, the laptop market is 25 years old. The reuse market, the aftermarket, is 22 years old. And there are elements within the reuse market that are really innovative. And like Sebastian said, the ITAD element of our work, or with Go IT Loop, or that part, there are really good participants in the aftermarket, Sebastian, and there are those that are not. And because it's not regulated, there lies a worry, I think, for large public sector clients. And what we're trying to do is to think like an original manufacturer, but we are a secondary manufacturer. And I think it's impossible for any organization to become a circular economy 100%, because it needs more than 100% to be in the game. In other words, if they've got products being serviced over here to come back into their organization, it might mean that the organization doesn't have enough material to satisfy 100% of the use, if that makes sense. So data is super important. I think it can be proven and evidenced that is manageable. I think assets to move the manufacturers from a linear to a circular economy is going to take maybe 20 years, 25 years. It's a generational push, and what it requires a pull from the public sector or from big business on not new products for them to stand up and take notice. Otherwise, they're not motivated to listen.
Thank you. So the next topic that I think falls quite nicely onto what we're all saying is that market demand is the key to accelerate the pace of change. When purchasers or consumers are asking for more durable, sustainable product, the market and the industry are going to follow. Andreas, I want to pose to you a question. What role does eco-labels or sustainability certification play in this, and how can they be used by purchasers to gain this kind of push onto industry?
Yeah, well, good question. So you can see us like an umbrella corporation for all the buyers, creating this collective push, more of like a union for workers. We're the same for purchasers, you could call us. So by gathering all the different purchasers, we collect enough leverage towards the brands and the manufacturers to actually start changing. Because on your own, it's very hard to make an impact. But when you get to a certain threshold, they have to listen. And we've seen this over and over again. And when you go one step beyond the brand owners, there's actually factories that's much bigger than the brand owners, such as Dell, HP, Lenovo, you know, all the big ones. So if we look in China, there's big manufacturing cities which employs up to 1 million people. So if one brand just goes into that manufacturer and say, hey, we want to change this, they hold too small of a percentage of the manufacturing in these factories. So they on their own can't even change things. So that's why it's so important to start on the ground, like grassroots level with the buyers and move up throughout the chain, because that's how we can create real change, I think.
Yeah, agree.